In the 1980s, researchers at a Toronto memory clinic noticed something that did not make sense. Two patients, identical brain scans, identical amyloid plaques, identical tau tangles, identical levels of neurological damage. One was significantly impaired, the other was nearly normal. The only difference the researchers could find was that one of them spoke two languages. Not fluently, not from childhood, just two languages. What they discovered next became one of the most replicated and most debated findings in cognitive aging science, and one of the most actionable pieces of research available to every adult over 60, regardless of education, genetics, or how many years it has been since they sat in a classroom. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly what the bilingual advantage is, what it does to the aging brain at the cellular level, and the three specific daily habits that research consistently shows can activate the same protective mechanism, whether you speak a second language already or have never studied one in your life. Nothing in this video is medical advice. Always consult your physician before making any changes to your health routine. The research team at the Rotman Research Institute in Toronto spent years trying to understand what they had observed in that memory clinic. They studied hundreds of patients diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease and looked for differences in the timeline of symptom onset. The finding that emerged was published in 2007 in the journal Neuropsychologia, and it stopped the field cold. Bilingual adults developed Alzheimer's symptoms an average of 4.5 years later than monolingual adults with equivalent levels of brain pathology. Not 4.5 years less brain damage. 4.5 years later, symptoms. The brain showed the same plaques, the same tangles, the same neuroinflammation, but the bilingual brain had built enough of something to compensate for the damage for years longer than the monolingual brain. That something has a name: cognitive reserve. Cognitive reserve is the brain's capacity to function normally despite accumulating damage. Think of it as the margin between the level of damage present in the brain and the threshold at which that damage becomes noticeable. The larger the reserve, the more damage the brain can absorb before symptoms appear. Research from University College London found that cognitive reserve is built across a lifetime through education, mentally demanding work, social engagement, and, consistently and powerfully, the management of more than one language system, not just speaking two languages. The act of managing them, constantly selecting the right language, suppressing the other, switching between them as context demands, is what builds the reserve. The specific brain regions strengthened by this process are the prefrontal cortex and the anterior cingulate cortex. The executive control networks that manage attention, task switching, and cognitive flexibility. These are also the regions that Alzheimer's disease damages first. Bilingualism builds the neural infrastructure in exactly the regions that aging and disease most need to attack. A 2014 study published in Neurology found that bilingual adults showed measurably greater gray matter density in the parietal cortex and the left inferior parietal lobe compared to monolingual adults of the same age, regions directly associated with language processing and cognitive flexibility. The structural difference was visible on brain scans, not as a function of education or socioeconomic status, as a function of managing two language systems. Write that down. Managing two language systems builds measurably more gray matter in the exact brain regions Alzheimer's targets first, and the effect is visible on a brain scan. Now, here is the finding that changes everything for adults over 60 who did not grow up bilingual. And it is the finding that most people never reach because the headline stops at the original discovery. You do not need to be fluent. Research from Penn State University found that even incomplete second language learning, adults who studied a second language for 6 to 9 months without achieving fluency, showed measurable improvements in executive control function and hippocampal activation compared to non-learners, not compared to native speakers, compared to people who did not study at all. The act of managing two language systems, even imperfectly, even at a beginner level, is neurologically protective regardless of proficiency level. The brain does not require fluency to build cognitive reserve. It requires the effort of managing competing linguistic systems simultaneously. A 2023 meta-analysis published in Bilingualism, Language and Cognition, covering 34 studies and over 4,000 participants found that late-life language learning, defined as beginning language study after the age of 60, produced measurable improvements in executive function, working memory, and processing speed within 12 to 16 weeks. 12 to 16 weeks. In adults who had never studied a second language before in their lives. 3 specific daily habits, backed by the research. Starting today. Habit 1. 15 minutes of active language learning every single day. Not a class once a week, not a weekend immersion program. 15 minutes daily. Which research from the University of Washington shows activates the executive control networks more effectively than longer, less frequent sessions because the daily repetition forces the brain to maintain the competing language system in active memory. Duolingo, Babbel, Rosetta Stone, or Pimsleur, any of these platforms deliver the daily management demand the brain needs. The language does not matter. Spanish, French, Italian, Mandarin, Japanese. The cognitive reserve benefit is equivalent across languages. Choose the one that motivates you to continue because consistency is the mechanism, not the language. If you already speak a second language, use IT more. Research consistently shows that bilingual adults who actively use both languages maintain significantly more cognitive reserve than those who spoke a second language in the past but stopped using it. The reserve requires ongoing management to remain active. Habit 2. Watch one program per week in your target language with subtitles in that language. Not English subtitles. Subtitles in the language you are learning. Research from the University of Nottingham found that reading subtitles in the target language while hearing the spoken version simultaneously forces the brain to process both linguistic input streams in parallel, activating the same dual system management that produces the cognitive reserve benefit in native bilinguals. Netflix, YouTube, and most streaming platforms offer audio and subtitle options in multiple languages. 45 minutes once per week in this format produces measurable improvements in language retention and executive function that 45 minutes of app-based learning cannot, because the natural speech patterns, colloquial vocabulary, and contextual meaning force the brain to work harder than structured lesson content. Habit 3. Find a conversation partner. This is the most neurologically powerful of the 3 habits, and the one most people never attempt, because it feels socially uncomfortable. But research from the Max Planck Institute for Psycholinguistics found that real-time conversation in a second language, even at a beginner level, produced a BDNF response comparable to aerobic exercise. The cognitive demand of managing real-time linguistic production, comprehension, and social response simultaneously activates the executive networks, the hippocampus, and the prefrontal cortex in combination. The same combination targeted by the enriched learning protocol we covered in video 14. Apps like Tandem and HelloTalk connect language learners for weekly 30-minute conversation exchanges at no cost. One 30-minute conversation per week in your target language produces cognitive reserve benefits that accumulate over months into years of additional protection against the symptom onset of cognitive decline. The 2 patients in that Toronto memory clinic had the same brain damage, the same plaques, the same tangles. One of them had spent years building a neural architecture robust enough to absorb that damage without showing it. 4.5 years of cognitive function that the other patient had lost. That architecture is not built in a hospital. It is not built in a doctor's office. It is built in 15 minutes a day, on an app, in front of a television, in a conversation with a stranger on the other side of the world. Every day you manage 2 language systems is a day you are building the reserve that may one day be the difference between functioning and not functioning. For 4.5 years. Drop a comment below with one word. What language are you learning or have always wanted to learn? Spanish, French, Italian, Japanese, or none yet? Your answer tells every other viewer in this community exactly where to start. Share this with one person over 60 who has been told it is too late to learn something new. The research says otherwise. And now they will know exactly what 15 minutes a day can build. Every research source cited is linked in the description below. Subscribe to Reclaim 60. Every week we cover the research your doctor never had time to give you. I will see you in the next one.